Legendary Night Season 3. It is a special that Sean put together. We're going to watch this trailer and show you guys what is he cooking up.
Legendary Nights is back for Season 3 on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Once in a while, you get a fight which etches itself into the history of the sport. Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston.
There might be some against that might be all, ladies and gentlemen. Get up there, Joe. Get up there. Get up in the...
Mike Tyson versus Frank Bruno.
Bruno and Tyson weren't just significant boxers, they were a cultural icon.
G. Tunney versus Jack Dempsey.
Dempsey doesn't stop to shoot his right over to Jack's face, but Dempsey doesn't stop. He goes on, and on.
And many more. Defining moments make or break. Controversy. Greatness. This series, we give you an in-depth look into some of the greatest nights in the sport of boxing.
Coming April. No, it's coming soon. The Legendary Nights Season 3. Sean, tell us a little bit a little bit about this upcoming season.
Yeah, it's Season 3 of what turned out to be a whole new kettle of fish for us. The expression we like to say. It started from an idea inspired from the original HBO Legendary Nights series, 2002 and 2003. Massive fan of that when I was growing up, and you know we like to talk about all these legendary fights, legendary tales, and it all started out with about 20 to 30 episodes, which is quite long for a season. But for us, it was just as we go along, we were just churning them out, and we were just like, you know, fight after fight after fight, story after story. And then as our whole network has developed, the way we produce our episodes, the way we put the stories together, the research that now goes into them. Previously, it was just sort of our memories, our thoughts, a bit of information. Now it's a whole new story and tale behind them all. And we're very proud of the fact that another season is out and people are really looking forward to it because of the way we tell these stories. You know, we consider ourselves to be a storytelling based podcasts with most of our podcasts. They're all different genres of the sport or part of the sport, but they're all telling different tales. So season 3 consists of 10 new episodes, 10 new fights. Some of them fights might not jump out at people as a go-to fight. You know, you look at fights in particular, like there's one tale, the tale of Tony Zale and Rocky Graziano, which is in this season, where they contested 3 fantastic fights way before our time, maybe even way before our parents' time as well. But these are forgotten fights and forgotten memories from the sport that need to be brought to life again, and stories that need to be brought to life and put out there again. Tony Zale, Rocky Graziano is a tale of the rough upbringing of one fighter and the guy that was the model citizen in another, who ended up going on a collision course to meet each other on 3 separate occasions, 3 separate fights. Now, the footage of some of these fights are available, but it's very limited. Very limited what you can get access to because of when these fights took place in the late 1940s. So, you know, it's for us, it's about describing the fights and telling the stories and getting all the information together to present you with what was a great story around these fights and these fighters. And this is part and parcel of from the people who were there at the time. So, we take a lot of sources from various historians, various books, various people that were around at the time. And there's a lot of quotes from a lot of different people. But, you can see the brilliance of the fights, and you can kind of paint that picture in your own mind of what this fight was really like. Couple that together with the footage of the fights, and you're onto a winner. Some of the fights in the season, though, Santiago, some of them are accessible via YouTube. Some of them are very well known. We've got the tale of George Foreman and Michael Moorer when George Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion of the world at the age of 45 in 1994. There's that fantastic tale. There's a tale that's very personal to me. It's Mike Tyson and Frank Bruno. Two fights which were quite one-sided fights, but the tales that surrounded them were truly amazing for us to learn about and understand what went into these fights and how it all came to fruition and all the struggles that each individual fighter was suffering outside of the ring. Mike Tyson, of course, going to prison for rape at the height of his career, essentially, and then coming out and becoming a different animal. There's lots of great stories in that particular episode. We've got episodes like Bobby Chacon versus Rafael Lemon, Willie Pep versus Sandy Sadler, Oscar De La Hoya versus Felix Trinidad, the fight of the millennium as it was billed. So we've got many fights and many tales like that in the season, which we really hope that everybody enjoys, because we've put so much time and effort into putting this research and these stories together that we hope people do appreciate it.
Can you tell us what do you want to bring out with this season versus season 2? I know season 2 you had a lot of Julio Cesar Chavez versus Taylor, Curry versus Hunnigan. Tell us what makes the season 3 different from season 2 that you can differentiate.
I think in this season, there's about 15 new fighters that we haven't covered before in any of our podcasts. So, you've got the likes of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston. That was one of the episodes that we're bringing out in the season as well. The whole story surrounding those two significant fights. But there's people that we've never covered before, like Tony Zale, like Rocky Graziano. We've never really covered Felix Trinidad before. We've never covered Chacon and Limon. There's a lot of fighters we've not covered across our podcast network. And when we bring them into the forefront of people's minds, it gets people this understanding and this picture that actually they want more. And it makes us want more. When we do the research for, say, certain episodes, like Zale and Graziano, for example, I wanted to know more about Graziano. So what we do is we will save it, and we'll save it for a future season or maybe for another podcast, which it sits under. For example, you look at Graziano and his life and his career, it makes for a potential episode for the darker side of boxing because of some of the stories that we've got, which we haven't necessarily included in this genre of podcast because it's not really suitable, but it definitely fits in another series. So no matter what you get with all these fighters, you're going to end up seeing that there are a lot of crossovers and a lot of directing to a lot of stuff that maybe we've already done because we've covered some of these guys already. Mike Tyson, for example, we've done Tyson and Holyfield in season 2, and we've done a career profile on both Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. So you'll see a lot of crossovers there. If you haven't already listened to them, then that's the perfect opportunity to then go, you know what, actually, I might go and listen to that particular episode, and you might actually get enlightened and educated just like we was.
As Sean was saying, there's a lot of fights out there that we don't know footage. A lot of these fights, I don't know what happened 30 years ago, but a lot of these fights were in pay-per-view, were behind closed doors. You had to pay. Mike Tyson versus Bruno. I had no idea. I'm interested to know about that. Check it out. Which I'm looking at with this graphic. It's a classic graphic. I didn't know Mike's nickname was Iron, and Frank Bruno, I had no idea who he was. Tell us a little bit about little preview with this fight, by the way.
Oh, well, easy preview for this one. Anyone that's followed Tyson's career will probably know at this point in time that Mike Tyson was, and what we're trying to paint the picture of here is how Mike Tyson's career went from being the baddest man on the planet, from being Iron Mike Tyson, to becoming a guy completely on the decline. You get to know a lot more about his personal life, the effects of losing Cus D'Amato before he becomes world champion, the effects of him being involved with Robin Givens and her mother, Ruth Roper, and how all that had a massive decline on him. The loss of Jim Jacobs as well. He lost Jim Jacobs after he lost Cus, and then Don King gets involved. So the stories, of course, surrounding all this happening as well. But across the pond in the UK, you've got Frank Bruno, who career never could have took off because he had an issue with his eye and his retina, which actually would come to plague him later on in his boxing career. And he goes through the ranks and he goes for a world title shot. He loses his first attempt in a world title shot. Then he puts himself into position to fight Tyson. They do fight the first time, but then they have a second fight in 1996. But it's the whole intertwining road which leads these two onto the collision course. That is the main talking point. And I think what we're trying to do is paint a picture of how these fights came together, and not necessarily this particular tale is the greatest of fights. It isn't. It's quite one-sided, in fact. For anybody that knows these fights will know, for about a round it was competitive, and then from there on out, Tyson's your man. But it's everything that surrounds it, everything that leads up to it, everything in the aftermath of it, that I think is what we've tried to paint a picture of, which tells a completely different tale from what you already know.
Yeah, and people remember Tyson versus Holyfield or Tyson Ray versus Sugar Ray Lewis, fights like that. But Bruno, no one talks about it. Of course, if you're in Sean's world, maybe a little bit more. Johnston, tell us a little bit about him, his role with this series.
Johnston, if he was available, he'd be here on the show. He's got a hectic schedule, hectic life, just like myself. But Johnston, I'll give him a big props really, because he probably doesn't get the credit from everybody that he deserves, solely because it's me that does a lot of the shows and it's me that does a lot of the stuff like this. But Johnston, he does so much work in the background to help put these shows together. He goes out, he gets all the research, he goes for all the newspaper articles online, and he gets all the quotes, and he puts everything together. He helps weave the story together, and we work together as a team to produce these episodes. And he's an integral part of what we do here at the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. And to be honest, we absolutely love doing what we do together, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this for many years to come, because there are definitely many more fights, many more fighters, and many more dark stories out there that we think need to be covered. So I think you've probably got us for another few years yet, guys.
I believe so. Every time I talk with Sean, his audience is growing, his exposure is growing, distribution is growing, and whatnot. Legendary Heights season 3. Sean, tell us, what is the best way for people to listen to the series, and what date it will come out?
So best way to listen to it is on any available podcasting app. So if you're UK based, the stereotypical ones are Apple, Spotify and Google. If they're in the US, I know you've got a lot more podcasting apps. You can pretty much find us on any podcasting app. If you type in Legendary Nights Podcast, you will pretty much find us. If you type us in on Google, Legendary Nights Podcast, we are the first search result that comes up. So you'll be able to find us there. You can find the Legendary Nights Podcast social media on Twitter at Legend Night Pod. That is the predominant podcast feed on there. We put all the episodes out there, all the historical stuff on there. But anybody who's been following us for a while knows the main feed's at BTR Boxing Podcast Network. That's why I tell you guys to go. In fact, we're actually dropping an introductory episode to season 3 very, very shortly. As soon as this show is done, there will be a new episode out introducing people to season 3. So get on it, listen to it. We've got, I think it's about 15-20 minutes long, just of our initial thoughts, a bit more in-depth detail into some of the fights, and a full list of all the episodes.
BTR Boxing, Friends of the Sportscast, and things like that. Check it out. And yeah, subscribe, like it. I've been listening to a few episodes. It gets me motivated. Boxing, is it different from what it was back then? You can determine that. It's up to the audience, of course.